The Nullarbor was a place where silence stretched longer than the horizon. Joe Wilkins had driven this route for 30 years, Port Augusta to Norseman, through scrubland and salt pans, and the kind of quiet that made you feel like the last soul on earth. He wasn't a man of chatter, wore his grief like a worn-out jacket, familiar, quiet, never spoken of. He drove the bus like he breathed steady, automatic. Until the day the boy appeared. It was early, the sun barely warming the bitumen when the boy boarded at the Seduna stop. No ticket, no parent. Just a small frame, quiet eyes, and a locket clutched in one hand. Joe didn't argue. Kids sometimes got shuffled on by mistake, and someone always claimed them by the next roadhouse. But this one didn't move from the back row, just stared out the window like he was searching for something long gone. 3 stops later, he was still there. "You gettin' off anywhere, mate?" Joe asked as the last passengers disembarked at Yalata. The boy looked up. His voice was barely a whisper. "I'm looking for my mum." Joe blinked. "She not on the bus with you?" The boy shook his head. "She left on the road." Joe felt something cold settle into his spine. He tried to laugh it off. Maybe the kid was confused. Maybe someone put him on the wrong line. But something in the way the boy sat, too still, too quiet, unsettled him. He checked the manifest. No record of the boy. He rewound the bus's CCTV. Nothing on the rear bench. But he'd seen him. Spoken to him. When he turned to glance back through the rearview mirror, the boy was still there. That night, at the Eucla Roadhouse, Joe stayed in the cab. The radio hissed with desert static. Just as he began to drift off, the CB crackled to life. "He's waiting for you, Joey." Joe jolted. The voice was soft, female, familiar. "Laura." His hands trembled. His wife had died 10 years ago, on this very road, during a detour he'd refused to speak of since. A crash. An unanswered call. A wound sealed over but never healed. The next morning, the boy was still there. When Joe confronted him gently, asking who his mother was, the boy opened the locket. Inside was a photo, grainy, sun-bleached but unmistakable. Laura, holding a toddler. Joe's breath caught in his throat. He couldn't explain it, couldn't rationalize it. But something deep inside him stirred a crack in the wall he'd built around that day, around her. That afternoon he drove in silence. The boy never spoke again, just sat in the last seat humming a tune. Laura used to sing under her breath. That night, Joe didn't sleep. He circled a point on the map he hadn't looked at in a decade. The brake line. He knew where he had to go. The boy was waiting, and so was the past. The road remained the same, long, flat, and unforgiving, but Joe Wilkins wasn't. He couldn't shake the boy from his mind. Still seated in the last row, small and silent, always looking out the window as if the answer to some great question lay buried in the dust. The boy never left, never aged, and no one else ever acknowledged his presence. Joe started testing it. He asked passengers if they'd noticed him. They shook their heads, confused. At the next roadhouse, he questioned the staff. No one remembered a child getting on. "You all right, Joe?" Cassie asked with a half-smile. "Maybe time to take a day off?" He reviewed the bus's rear camera. Nothing, just an empty seat. But when he turned to look in the mirror, the boy was still there, staring straight ahead. Joe felt a chill run through him that no desert sun could burn off. The boy didn't talk much, but when he did, it cut deep. "She said she'd wait," he murmured once. "Right where the trees bend near the broken sign." Joe blinked. He knew that place. Mile marker 47. The turnoff he'd never taken. The one that haunted his dreams. The site where Laura's car was found 10 years ago, overturned, crushed, empty. One night, parked under a cold starscape, Joe finally opened the shoebox of Laura's belongings he'd kept hidden for a decade. Among her old scarf and faded postcards was a photograph, Laura holding a young boy. His face turned, half in shadow. Around his neck, a locket. The same locket the boy on the bus clutched every day. Joe had dismissed the photo years ago, convinced it was someone else's child. But now, doubt crept in like a whisper. And then came the voice low and broken through the bus's dusty CB. "Joey, you didn't see me, but I was there." Laura's voice. Soft. Familiar. Impossible. Joe gripped the receiver. "Laura?" Only static answered. That night, the boy approached the front of the bus for the first time. He didn't speak right away, just pressed his palm against the glass, looking out at the blackness. Then he turned to Joe. "I don't know where to go. She said I'd find her here, but I think you have to take me the rest of the way." Joe's hands trembled on the steering wheel. "Where?" The boy looked up, eyes dark and clear. "Where she left you. Where you left yourself." The next morning, Joe didn't take the main line. He turned at mile 47. Onto the brake line. Onto the road he had sworn never to return to. The dust rose behind him. The boy sat back in his seat, humming Laura's lullaby. And Joe drove toward the place where silence once buried him whole. The brake line hadn't changed. The bitumen cracked like old scars. The roadside signs faded to bone-white silhouettes. Joe drove in silence, the bus rattling with every dip in the road, his hands tight on the wheel. He passed landmarks that flickered between memory and mirage, a twisted gum tree where he and Laura once stopped to picnic. A rusted-out sedan with wildflowers growing through its roof. The boy remained in the back seat, quiet, humming. Always that same lullaby. It had been 10 years since Joe had taken this route, the detour Laura insisted on the day of the accident. "It'll be beautiful," she'd said, pointing out the longer scenic drive, but Joe had refused that day, taking the main road. Hours later, after they argued, Laura left in the other car, still upset. He never saw her alive again. Now the memories returned in fragments, soft and sharp. The last text she sent, "I'll wait at the bend." The bend he never reached, until now. As the bus crested a low rise, a familiar curve came into view, a bend in the road where a sun-bleached road sign leaned at a strange angle. Joe slowed, breath catching in his throat. Just beyond it, he saw something glint in the dirt. He pulled over. The boy stepped off first, walked straight to a small clearing beneath a pair of leaning gum trees. There, half buried in sand and scrub, was what remained of Laura's car. Rusted, crushed, vines climbing through the cracked windshield. A decade swallowed by silence. Joe dropped to his knees. "I should have come back," he whispered. "I should have listened." The boy stood beside him. "She did wait. She still is." Inside the wreck, something sparkled. Joe reached in, heart pounding. It was a music box, Laura's. The one she kept on her nightstand, the one that played the lullaby. He turned the key. It groaned, then clicked. Music. Faint, distorted, but unmistakable. Joe wept. That night, he slept in the bus with the windows down, stars overhead, dust in his hair. The boy stood outside most of the night, watching the trees. Just before dawn, Joe awoke to the boy whispering, "She's close now. We're almost there." Joe turned. "Where's and where?" The boy looked east, toward a patch of land where the road faded into nothing. "To the station that isn't on your map." Joe started the engine. The bus rumbled forward. And for the first time since Laura's death, he wasn't afraid of the road ahead. The road narrowed until it was little more than a dirt vein, threading through red earth and wind-carved stone. Joe followed it with hands tight on the wheel, the boy silent at the back, eyes fixed ahead. The horizon rippled with heat then, like a mirage settling into form, it appeared. A train station in the middle of the desert. No tracks led to it, no road signs marked it, it wasn't on any map. But it stood there, weather-worn and still, as though waiting. Joe parked the bus. Neither man nor boy spoke. The child stepped off first, walking without hesitation toward the station. Joe followed, every step heavier, a tremor rising in his chest. The platform was cracked, sun-bleached timber. A faded sign above the door read, Northline Junction. Joe had never heard of it. Inside, golden light bathed the old wooden walls. Dust danced in still air. But what caught Joe's breath was not the glow, it was the figure behind the counter. Laura. Not as he remembered her last, faded in a hospital bed, distant in grief, but as she had been before the accident. Young, vibrant, hair caught in a breeze that didn't blow, dressed in the blue sundress she wore the last time they danced on the back porch. She looked up and smiled. "I thought you'd never get here, Joey." Joe's legs buckled, his voice broke. "I didn't know how." "You weren't ready," she said gently. "But he brought you here." The boy stood nearby, watching them both. Joe turned to him, tears streaking down sun-lined cheeks. "Who is he?" Laura walked over and touched the boy's shoulder. "He's the goodbye you never got to say. The question you never asked. The moment I waited for." Joe looked at the boy again and saw it. The resemblance, his own eyes, her smile, a life they never had. A future cut short. The boy held out the locket. "You kept me alive by never letting her go." Laura nodded. "And now you can." Joe stepped forward and knelt. He took the locket, placed it in his pocket and whispered, "Thank you." Laura kissed his forehead. "I've always been here. In the lullaby. In the dust. In you." Light poured through the cracks of the station. The boy took her hand. Together, they turned, faded, became wind, became light. Joe stood alone in the empty room. Outside, the sun rose fully. The station vanished like mist. Nothing remained but scrubland and silence, and a single set of footprints beside his own. Joe walked back to the bus. He placed the locket in the glove box, started the engine, and eased the bus back onto the road. This wasn't the end of the route, but it was the beginning of peace. The desert had changed, or maybe Joe had. The road stretched ahead like it always had, flat, harsh, sun-drenched, but the silence no longer ached. Now it hummed. He returned to his route, the familiar line across the Nullarbor, but something in his rhythm softened. He greeted passengers more easily. He let the radio play music instead of static. He even whistled sometimes, a fractured melody that once came from Laura's lips. The boy was gone. No more sightings in the rearview mirror. No more locket. Just the memory, sharp, strange, and healing. Yet each time Joe reached the Ghost Gum bend at mile marker 47, he pulled over. He'd walk to the edge of the bush, lay a single desert flower by the scrub and whisper, "Safe travels." It wasn't a ritual. It was a promise. Passengers noticed. One asked, "Is this a memorial?" Joe smiled, tapping the steering wheel. "Something like that." One morning, a young boy climbed aboard at Seduna. Thin arms, big eyes, quiet. He sat near the back, not the last row, but close. Joe glanced at him through the mirror, heart ticking. When he asked for his stop, the boy simply said, "Where the trees bend." Joe paused. "You believe in ghosts?" The boy looked up. "I believe in people who stay." Joe drove in silence, a familiar peace stirring in his chest. At the end of the week, he stopped by the old site. There was a tree, now a sapling someone had planted and cared for. Not Joe, but someone. A small wooden sign had been hammered beside it. "For those still on the road." Joe added a note beneath it, "Keep going, they're walking beside you." He returned to the bus, where passengers waited. As he turned the key, the engine hummed and the desert wind picked up. In the rearview mirror, a flash of sunlight caught something strange, familiar eyes. A blue dress, a smile. He blinked. Gone. But Joe smiled too. As the bus roared down the long stretch of red earth, a soft tune came to his lips. The lullaby, half remembered, half invented. He sang it under his breath. And in the back, the boy began to hum along.